I'm Nicholas Snow, and this is a special report on the PromoHomo.TV network. One of the functions I wanted to have on the network as we've launched in the last week is my ability to go to you fairly quickly with hot topics. Sometimes I'll do a breaking news piece that happens within hours of us hearing some significant breaking story. And in this case, it's the day after major headlines regarding Supreme Court decisions and the fact that women's reproductive health care rights are hanging in the balance. Many of us will hear these big headlines, but we don't know about the organizations and the activists behind the scenes who are making it happen. And at least I don't have the ability to fully interpret what these decisions mean coming out of the Supreme Court. For example, yesterday's decision regarding the state of Louisiana. We're supposed to look at it, or we're instructed to look at it. We're informed by those who know that this should be approached with mixed emotions. And I have the perfect guest who's going to be on the show today. By the way, what inspired this was I received the official statement from the National LGBT Task Force regarding the Supreme Court decision. So I've reached out, and with me on the show today is Candace Bond-Theriault, the Senior Policy Counsel for Reproductive Rights, Health, and Justice, and the Democracy Project Director at the National LGBT Task Force. She works through a Black queer feminist lens to create change and shift culture towards intersectional liberation through increasing abortion access, contraceptive equity, and ensuring religious perspectives don't harm civil rights protections. Candace received her LL.M degree in gender and legislation from the American University Washington College of Law, her JD from North Carolina Central University School of Law, and her BA in Human Rights with a focus on race, gender, and sexuality from the College of William and Mary. She is a yoga teacher, writer, makeup enthusiast, and aspiring optimist. I love that. Her writing has appeared in Self Magazine, Blavity, Rewire, Miss Magazine, The Advocate, The Griot, Medium, and the Huffington Post. She lives in Northern Virginia with her husband and the cutest Yorkie you've ever seen. And I'll be back with Candace right after this. If you're watching live during the broadcast, you can comment on your social media. I have the opportunity to see your comments or questions for the guest today, and I can curate them into the broadcast. So without further delay, let me welcome to the show Candace Bond-Theriault. Candace, thank you for being here today.
Yes, thank you for having me.
And more important, thank you for your dedication to humanity and the way that your life and passions are manifesting. For those of us who don't have the legal understanding, insights, lens, vocabulary that you do, please break down the decision by the Supreme Court yesterday and explain for us how come this is something that we need to take with mixed emotion, because women's reproductive rights are in the balance, and this isn't a step back, but it's certainly also not a step forward.
Right, that's exactly right. And thank you for having me today. And yesterday was a big day, a big win in the reproductive health rights and justice landscape. And as you just said, it's still, we didn't really gain a lot of ground, but we didn't lose any ground. But just a quick recap on what happened yesterday in June Medical Services is that there was a 5-4 decision by the Supreme Court. The opinion was written by Justice Breyer and joined by the other liberal justices or more progressive justices on the court. And basically, the opinion said that the Louisiana law that was the one that was up for contest was completely unconstitutional based on both Planned Parenthood versus Casey, which is an earlier 1992 case around reproductive rights, but also based on the precedent that was just set for short years ago in Whole Women's Health, because it was a very similar identical law around admitting privileges and basically requiring abortion providers to have admitting privileges to hospitals within a certain mile radius to their clinics, which is just an unnecessary burden to providers, and what we call in the reproductive health rights and justice world a trap law, which is a targeted regulation against abortion providers, and was just unnecessary. And the court saw through the argument of the anti-abortion advocates out there that, you know, Roe and Planned Parenthood versus Casey are the law, and bringing this challenge, even though the court shifted a little bit, they were still going to adhere to the past precedent that was just set. And there was an important concurrence by the Chief Justice John Roberts, and basically he said that he was basically ruling on this case on the doctrine of stare decisis, which is the Latin term used to basically say precedent, and that he was not in agreement necessarily with the unconstitutionality of the law, but he was adhering to the stare decisis doctrine, which is an important win, and I'll take it. And then there were dissents by the other 4 justices.
One of the things that has surprised people across the political spectrum are these recent decisions out of the Supreme Court, which you can say are not what the conservatives wanted those decisions to be. Have you been as surprised by these decisions coming out of the court?
I have been, and I think June Medical is a great example of, I'm surprised by the way that Justice Roberts ruled, but I'm also not surprised because he is a minimalist when it comes to the law, and he likes small increments in changes in the law. And he was basically like, we just decided this 4 years ago, no need to revisit it, even though I might, you know, as the Chief Justice, disagree with the underlying law itself. Just for precedent's sake, there's really no point in talking about this or relitigating it. And I think the same is true for the DACA case. It's basically, you know, the Supreme Court's like, we said what we said, and that's what we say it. And you really do have to listen to what we're saying and what that means.
One of the things I said at the top of the show is that a lot of people aren't aware of who behind the scenes and what organizations are basically fighting for our rights and lives. And I'd love for you to elaborate on the work of the National LGBTQ Task Force and your specific role with them.
Yeah, so the National LGBTQ Task Force is one of the oldest national LGBTQ-focused organizations working for full justice, full equality for LGBTQ individuals and our families and our communities. And we take reproductive health rights and justice really seriously, and we recognize that there is an intertwined link between reproductive health and reproductive justice and LGBTQ rights and liberation, and that you can't have one without the other. If LGBTQ folks are not included in the fight for reproductive health, rights, and justice, then we're leaving an entire population out. And also, if we're talking about LGBTQ rights and liberation, if we're not talking about important services like access to abortion and birth control and adequate and comprehensive and culturally competent sex education, then it's not LGBTQ inclusive, and you're leaving a whole swath of people out. So we really see it as one larger progressive movement. And so we work on these intersections intentionally to bring awareness to the ways that these issues intersect within our communities, but also within our own personal lives and within our physical bodies.
I first became aware of the task force long before you were born, I'm sure, in the early 1980s. And I'm guessing that the task force was started in the late 70s. Do you happen to know?
Yes, yes. I think we are going to the 54th year, or we are in the 54th year of our.
Okay. So then that would have been probably around 1970, even maybe, because I just would have had my 40-year high school reunion had it not been for the pandemic. All right, now I'm feeling really old. Would you? One of the things that has happened is that the courts are being stacked with conservative judges behind the scenes when all this noise and atrocities are coming out of the current administration. And I'm curious to know what kind of conversations that you're having with your colleagues about the long-term impact of the way that the courts are being reshaped under the current administration.
Yeah, it's really horrifying, actually, to think about how the courts are being packed and stacked with conservative-minded justices all across the board, from local to state to federal. There is a entirely large progressive coalition that is working out there that is led by the Leadership Conference for Civil and Human Rights that is really focusing on this particular matter because for a lot of the progressive wins that we have had, it's been the court that has kind of decided and interpreted law in a way that is read to be more progressive. And it's kind of like our last stop. And so, not having that as a potential last stop for a law to be implemented is really horrifying. And this current administration, does a lot of things wrong. And one thing that they are doing is stacking the court.
It's very frightening. What would you say to people who are viewing that want to increase their participation in fighting for solutions around the issues that we hold near and dear?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much that you can do. One is to educate yourself and find organizations like the National LGBTQ Task Force or other organizations that you trust to provide you with actual credible fact-checked information. There's a lot of misleading news headlines out there, so it's really about getting down to the truth and getting down to the fact. So making sure that you're educating yourself in those mediums, but also putting my 501c4 hat on for a second. It's also about contacting your legislatures and legislative representatives, whether that be local, state, or federal, and talking to them about the issues that matter to you. That's so effective. I don't think folks really know how extremely influential that is, because your member of Congress really wants to hear from you, even more so than they want to hear from me. As a Virginian, my Congress people from Virginia want to hear from me, but Congress folks in Minnesota might be like, okay, well, we understand that you're really passionate about this issue, but I care about what my constituents care about, because at the end of the day, it's all about voting and reelection, and that's what they're thinking about. And it's important to make sure that we get a handle on getting out to vote and finding ways to vote in the safest way possible during this time of COVID-19. And, not letting all the new technicalities that are going to be put upon us for public safety to deter us from actually getting to the polls, because it's just so important. This election, I mean, it just seems in my lifetime that every election seems to be getting more and more important. And every time we go to a presidential election, I'm like, this is the most important election, or a congressional election. But again, here we are in 2020, and I am saying the same thing, that this is the most important election, and we really have to get out there and vote.
I would be remiss if I didn't take the opportunity to speak with you and your own unique life experience about what's going on around the fact that Black Lives Matter and the fact that many of us are becoming much more aware of the significance of what Black people have been facing, and that those that don't believe that Black Lives Matter are more rabid than ever. In the point of taking personal responsibility, one of the things I just want to share with you is that I acknowledge that it's my responsibility to learn, to seek out information, to talk to other white people about being part of the solution and to what extent we've been part of the problem. I'm taking a deep dive into the understanding of microaggressions. I'm avoiding the temptation to ask people like you to tell me what to do, because I've been informed that it's really my responsibility and it's not up to you to tell me what to do. You have your own plate that is very full. What I want to acknowledge and then give you the opportunity to say whatever you want about the issue as an expert because of the life you're living, is that as a participant in LGBTQ activism for decades, I sort of always felt that by proxy I was involved in every fight for civil and equal rights, and that we were all in the same fight together. And it's hit me very powerfully that no, I haven't been fighting the same fight as my Black queer brothers and sisters, or people in general, for so many different reasons. I am cloaked in my white privilege. So that's what I'm experiencing and realizing and taking a deep dive into. But I'd love for you to spend the last few minutes of our time today just to reflect about this hot issue of the day, about anything you want to say.
Yeah, I mean, I think Black Lives Matter, the Black Lives Matter movement, and the reproductive justice movement are so intertwined. Reproductive justice is the framework and movement that was founded in 1994 by Black women in order to center Black women, and, protesting against police brutality and criminalization of our people and killing of our people is a direct reproductive justice issue. So for me, even on an intellectual level, what's happening in the world around the killings of Black folks together with COVID is just such a example of how reproductive health rights and justice, and particularly reproductive justice, is just so important of a framework at this moment. And, it's also, for me, I'm taking the time personally to think about, what do I need to continue to show up in this moment, and focusing on what I need to move forward more so than focusing on, educating other people. And this is also a moment that I'm reminded that this, the killing of Black folks is not new in this country, but, neither is all of the harm and the killings of Indigenous folks. And that's on me to learn. So I'm also thinking about what are the places and spaces that I need to do more of my work in, because it's, we're not all in the same fights, and we need to be, and we're not going to be able to show up in the same ways, but it's on me, just as it's on you, to figure out what are the best ways that I can show up in those specific fights.
Well, I'm very honored by your presence on the show today. I'm actually showing the National LGBT Task Force website, the URLs, thetaskforce.org, thetaskforce.org. What would you like to say in conclusion? Because I promised I would keep this to about 20 minutes, and I want to be true to my word.
Yeah, I think the two things. One, that this case, the June Medical Services decision, is helpful and good and a win. And, we don't get a lot of wins, so we have to celebrate each and every one. And Roe was never going to save or protect people of color, queer and trans folks. There's a lot of people that have been left out of that decision. So when thinking about reproductive rights, I encourage folks to look at it through a reproductive justice movement to think about who needs to be centered in this moment. And also, June Medical came out yesterday, but there was also another horrible case that came out from the same Supreme Court around foreign aid assistance for organizations doing HIV and AIDS prevention and treatment work, basically saying that if you're going to be providing that work, it's a First Amendment protection for organizations to also require you to have a negative stance on sex trafficking and prostitution, which is so horrible and horrific in so many ways. And the fact that that came out on the same day as June Medical Services, and folks aren't really talking about them in the same, even though they're similarly about, healthcare, about treatment, about all of the things, is something that we really need to lift up, the intersections of these are the same people. We are all the same people, regardless of whether it's foreign or domestic. We're all affected by this. And so we really need to be talking about both of these cases together.
Well, if you ever want to come back and focus more specifically on that issue with a panel of your own choosing, I'm more than happy to provide a platform for that. And I just really appreciate your time today. And as I mentioned at the top of the show, for the contributions you're making in and with your life.
Thank you so much.
Have a wonderful day.
You too.
That was Candace Bond-Theriault, an amazing advocate on staff for the National LGBTQ Task Force. Go to the taskforce.org if you want to reach out to her directly. She's there in the staff directory. And thank you for watching. Share this broadcast. It's very important. And until next time, I'm Nicholas Snow.